This is CNN Breaking News.
And welcome to our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. We're joined this hour by the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr. Attorney General, thank you so much for coming in. I know you're incredibly busy. We have a lot to talk about. I want to talk about Wisconsin and Oregon, but I want to start and get your reaction to what we heard from the President of the United States about you last night. Listen to this.
Bill Barr can go down as the greatest attorney general in the history of our country, or he can go down as just another guy. It depends.
Is it appropriate for the President of the United States to be putting pressure on you in the way he clearly did?
I don't feel any pressure from that.
You don't think he's trying to pressure you into going forward with indictments and criminal charges and stuff like that?
No, that's, when we talk in private, he doesn't talk like that, so.
He doesn't talk like that to you privately, but publicly he is. But is it appropriate for a President of the United States to be speaking like that publicly about the sitting attorney?
What do you think is inappropriate about what he said?
Well, let me play another clip. This is what he said 3 weeks ago or so, elaborating. Listen to this.
I hope they're not going to be politically correct, and I hope they do what? Because the fact is, this was President Obama knew everything. Vice President Biden, as dumb as he may be, he knew everything, and everybody else knew everything. They spied on my campaign, which is treason. They spied both before and after I won. Bill Barr can go down as the greatest attorney general in the history of our country, or he can go down as just an average guy. It depends on what's going to happen.
I see you smiling, but...
well, I sort of responded to that by saying that, if I was really concerned about being politically correct, I wouldn't have joined the administration. And also, I held a press conference and said that neither President Obama or Vice President Biden were under investigation.
But is it appropriate, though?
That's how I respond.
But is it appropriate, and you've worked for another president, President George H.W. Bush, is it appropriate for a president to be urging you to launch criminal investigations against his political opponents?
Well, I didn't take that as launching a criminal investigation. We're reviewing the Russiagate thing, and I think he's interested in the results of it. But I didn't think it was appropriate for either Vice President Biden or Kamala Harris to call for the charging of a police officer before that matter is reviewed and all the facts are in.
We're going to get to that. Let me just follow up on this. Is it appropriate, though, for the sitting president to be accusing his predecessor, President Obama, and former Vice President Biden of committing treason?
Well, treason is a legal term. I think he's using it colloquially. To commit treason, you actually have to have a state of war with a foreign enemy. But I think he feels that they were involved in an injustice. And if he feels that, he can say it.
Are they under criminal investigation?
Who?
Are they under criminal investigation?
I already said, I've said that they're not under criminal investigation.
But the president is accusing them of criminal investigation. He wants them to be under criminal investigation because he says they committed treason.
You're talking about Vice President Biden?
Vice President Biden and the former president.
Yeah, I said
Obama.
I held a press conference and said they were not.
All right, let's talk about Friday. Marks 60 days before the election, and the tradition in the Justice Department is you don't go forward with charges against individuals that could be seen as politically inappropriate or politically against opponents. Are you going to honor that tradition?
I put out the guidance that has always been put out by the Department of Justice, and I'll abide by it.
What is that guidance?
That guidance is people shouldn't do things for political reasons.
So will you honor that?
Yes.
You will honor that. The perception is that the Justice Department potentially, if they weren't to honor that, could be seen as interfering in the election.
Well, as I said, I will handle these cases as appropriate, and I do not think anything that we do in the Durham investigation, I assume that's what you're talking about, is going to be affecting the election.
So you don't think there'll be charges in the Durham investigation 60 days before the election?
Well, the 60 days is not part of the rule, but I said that I don't think anything we're going to do would violate our policy, be consistent with our policy.
Let's turn to Kenosha. You and the president were there yesterday. The city is clearly struggling in the aftermath of what happened to Jacob Blake, who was shot 7 times in the back by a police officer. Neither you nor the president had a chance to meet with him, or his family, for that matter. What would be your message to them?
To who?
To the Blake family.
I guess my message to them would be what it would be to all Americans, which is in cases where it's possible or there's concern over excessive force, we have a process in this country to make that determination. And it involves initially the state looking at it and also the federal government. And we are investigating it. And that should follow due process and be fair to everybody, including the police officer. And violence is not appropriate. Our justice system has to respond to analysis, reasoned analysis, not mob violence.
So you testified that you think you understand the conversations, this is when you were testifying before Congress, that black parents have with their children about racism in this country. How do you think African American parents around the country explain to their kids what exactly happened to Jacob Blake, for example, and why that police officer had his knee on George Floyd's neck for almost 9 minutes?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to talk about the Blake case.
Why not?
Because I think it's different than the Floyd case.
What's different?
Well, Floyd was already subdued, incapacitated, in handcuffs, and was not armed. In the Jacob case, he was in the midst of committing a felony, and he was armed. So that's a big difference. From the standpoint,
his family says he wasn't armed.
Well, I think
there may have been a knife in the car, but he wasn't armed when he was shot.
Well,
that's what his family and his lawyers say.
I've stated what I believe is to be the difference, and that's why I don't want to talk about them as if they're interchangeable. Okay. Now, I did say that I do think that there appears to be a phenomenon in the country where African Americans feel that they're treated, when they're stopped by police frequently, as suspects before they're treated as citizens. I don't think that necessarily reflects some deep-seated racism in police departments or in most police officers. I think the same kind of behavior is done by African American police officers. I think there are stereotypes. I think people operate very frequently according to stereotypes, and I think it takes extra precaution on the part of law enforcement to make sure we don't reduce people to stereotypes. We treat them as individuals.
Because on this program, Jacob Blake Sr., the father, said there were two justice systems in our country, one that shot his son 7 times in the back, and one that let the 17-year-old white gunman walk away after shooting and killing 2 people. Your reaction?
Well, I think the gunman escaped, and the government of Wisconsin is seeking his extradition.
But are there 2 justice systems here in the United States?
No, I don't think there are 2 justice systems. I think the narrative that that the police are on some epidemic of shooting unarmed black men is simply a false narrative, and also the narrative that that's based on race. The fact of the matter is it's very rare for an unarmed African American to be shot by a white police officer. There were 10 cases last year. 6 of them, the suspect was attacking the police officer physically. So these are rare things compared to the 7,000 to 8,000 young black men who are killed every year.
Because you've said you don't believe there's systemic racism in the justice in our justice system among the police, but you did say this. You did say, I do think it is a widespread phenomenon that African American males in particular are treated with extra suspicion and maybe not given the benefit of the doubt.
That's what I just said.
But doesn't that sound like systemic racism?
No, to me the word systemic means that it's built into the institution, and I don't think that's true. I think our institutions have been reformed in the past 60 years, and if anything has been built in, it's a bias to non-discrimination and safeguards against that. And so that's what I'm reacting to on systemic. And also I think we have to be a little careful about throwing the idea of racism around. Racism usually means, that I believe that because of your race, you're a lesser human being than me. And I think there are people in the United States that feel that way, but I don't think it is as common as people suggest. And I think we have safeguards to ensure that it doesn't really have an effect to someone's future. I think we've made a lot of progress in the past 60 years. To listen to the American left nowadays, you'd think we've gotten nowhere after all.
There's no doubt there's been a lot of progress, but do you think black people are treated differently by law enforcement than white people?
I think there are some situations where statistics which suggest that they are treated differently, but I don't think that that's necessarily racism.
What is it?
Well, you know, like, didn't Jesse Jackson say that when he looks behind him and he sees a group of young black males walking behind him, he's more scared than when he sees a group of white youths walking behind him? Does that make him a racist? Does that make him a racist?
But it sounds if like there are two systems, one for blacks, one for whites. That sounds like there's still racism in the justice system.
Well, no, I think we have to make sure that, you know, stereotypes do not govern our actions in the justice system. And I think police departments do a pretty good job of trying to police against that. And I think there's more progress that can be made and more reform, and we're going about that. But the demonization of the police and the idea that this is so widespread an epidemic is simply wrong.
On Monday night, President Trump compared the police shootings, like Jacob Blake's, for example, in his words, to a golfer choking and missing a 3-foot putt. Is that how you view police shootings, like a golfer missing a 3-foot putt?
No, I think what the president was saying there, and it's something that I think should be said and has to be said, that in many of these shooting situations, it is not because of race. It's because the officer is scared for his life and is in a situation where a half a second can mean the difference between his life and his death, and he's wrestling with somebody, and they sometimes may do things that appear in hindsight to be excessive. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's racism.
Let's talk about Portland while I have you. The president suggested once again that sending in his words, a massive group of people that are really highly trained to places like Portland, Chicago, and New York was something that he would do. He said, if they don't call and ask for help, he said, we just have to do it ourselves. Do you think sending in federal law enforcement to cities that haven't requested that help is appropriate or legal?
It was obviously legal, but what we're trying to do is make clear that it's the state's responsibility and the locality to provide protection. If they are unable or unwilling to do that, at some point things could reach a state where the federal government has to step in.
But the president, he could do that tomorrow under the Insurrection Act. He could send in federal law enforcement to Portland if he wanted to, right?
Well, we don't need the Insurrection Act to send federal law enforcement anywhere in the country. This idea that we're like an Indian reservation and we can only enforce the law inside federal buildings is nonsense. This country is under two sovereigns, and the federal government is sovereign countrywide, and every square foot of this country is within the jurisdiction of federal law enforcement.
So if he wanted to, he could send in federal troops tomorrow?
Well, I was talking about law enforcement. I know that it's, you know, news networks are fond of the word troop when they're referring to federal law enforcement. It's the first time I've ever heard that.
Why doesn't he do that if he thinks it's so bad? In Chicago, New York, Portland, places like that, why doesn't he do that?
Well, I think he's right in saying that there could come a point where we do that, but it's the governor's responsibility and the mayor's. It's very easy to maintain peace in these cities. In any city where the mayor backs the police chief is doing his job, and the governor is willing to provide backup support, there will be peace on the streets, and there has been peace on the streets.
I know that you and the president have blamed Antifa, a far-left group here in the United States, for stirring up the violence in some of these cities, and I know you've set up a task force at the Justice Department to look into this. If Antifa is really behind what we've seen, some of the looting, some of the burning, some of the violence, why haven't there been any major arrests made of Antifa?
Well, there have been 300 arrests made across the country.
Apparently not.
But being a member of Antifa is a movement, as I've made clear, okay? There's not a group necessarily that is called Antifa, and membership in a group does not necessarily mean you've committed a crime. The elements of the crime are things like throwing a Molotov cocktail.
But have any Antifa-related individuals been arrested?
Yes.
How many?
I couldn't tell you that.
Because based on the evidence we've seen, there aren't many at all as far as Antifa directly related individuals.
Some self-identify them as Antifa. Some refuse to provide even their identity when they're arrested.
I know
I've talked to every police chief in every city where there's been major violence, and they all have identified Antifa as the ramrod for the violence. They are flying around the country. We know people who are flying around the country. We know where they're going. We see some of the purchases they're making before the riots of weapons to use in those riots. So we are following it, and Antifa is deep.
Is that illegal what they're doing?
Crossing state lines to engage in rioting is.
In an interview,
federal offense.
In an interview this week, the president claimed that he heard about a plane, in his words, loaded with thugs wearing dark uniforms from a certain city that was headed to the Republican National Convention here in Washington, in his words, to do big damage. He didn't offer any specifics. He later, the next day, changed the story. The plane wasn't coming to Washington, was leaving Washington. Have you asked the FBI to investigate this?
I don't have to ask the FBI because we received numerous reports of individuals coming from Portland, Washington, Seattle, and several other cities to come into Washington for the specific purpose of causing a riot.
Were they wearing black uniforms and were they loaded, if you will?
There were many on planes. We've received multiple reports on this topic.
And so what the president was talking about was information that you provided the president?
I don't know what the president was specifically
It's widely reported
to.
On Facebook there was some conspiracy that was reported weeks ago about this sort of thing.
I don't know what the president was referring to, but I will say that we are trying to follow these things, and we received numerous reports of people coming from other cities into Washington, as we received many reports of people going into Kenosha from various states.
But you're saying you don't know specifically what the president was referring to?
No, I don't know what the president was referring to.
When he spoke about this?
He seems to be talking in general terms. I don't know what he's referring to.
All right, let's talk a little bit about what the president also said just a little while ago about North Carolina's absentee voting system. He said, and I'm quoting him right now, "So let them send it in and let them go vote. And if the system is as good as they say it is, then obviously they won't be able to vote." That sounds like he's actually encouraging people to commit a crime, to vote twice.
I'm sorry, you'll have to read that again.
All right, this is what he said. So let them send it in, the email, the voting by mail, and let them go vote the ballot. Let them send in the ballot, and then let them go vote. And if the system is as good as they say it is, then obviously they won't be able to vote. It sounds like he's encouraging people to break the law and try to vote twice.
Well, I don't know exactly what he was saying, but it seems to me what he's saying is he's trying to make the point that the ability to monitor this system is not good. And if it was so good, if you tried to vote a second time, you would be caught if you voted in person.
That would be illegal if they did that. If somebody mailed in a ballot and then actually showed up to vote in person, that would be illegal.
I don't know what the law in the particular state says.
You can't vote twice.
Well, I don't know what the law in the particular state says and when that vote becomes final.
Is there any state that says you can vote twice?
Well, there's some, maybe that you can change your vote up to a particular time. I don't know what the law is, so I'm not going to offer.
He was saying test the system.
If you know what he's saying, why are you asking me what he's saying?
He doesn't believe in the mail-in voting. You're the Attorney General of the United States.
Why does you? Yeah.
He said if you expand mail-in voting, this is the president.
This is,
it's reckless.
Well, this is a sort of cheap talk to get around the fundamental problem, which is the bipartisan commission chaired by Jimmy Carter and James Baker said back in 2009 that mail-in voting is fraught with the risk of fraud and coercion.
But since then, there have been
until
a lot
this
of investigations that haven't proved it.
Let me talk.
Yeah, please.
And since that time, there have been in the newspapers, in networks, academic studies saying it is open to fraud and coercion. The only time the narrative changed is after this administration came in. But elections that have been held with mail have found substantial fraud and coercion. For example, we indicted someone in Texas, 1,700 ballots collected from people who could vote. He made them out and voted for the person he wanted to. Okay? Because that kind of thing happens with mail-in ballots, and everyone knows
that. But there are individuals, cases, but as far as widespread fraud We haven't seen that since.
Well, we haven't had the kind of widespread use of mail-in ballots that's being proposed. We've had absentee ballots from people who request them from a specific address. Now what we're talking about is mailing them to everyone on the voter list when everyone knows those voter lists are inaccurate. People who should get them don't get them, which is what has been one of the major complaints in states that have tried this in municipal elections. And people who get them are not the right people. They're people who have replaced the previous occupant, and they can make them out. And sometimes multiple ballots come to the same address with a whole several generations of occupants. Do you think that's a way to run a vote?
Well, the only thing I'm saying is that so far we haven't seen widespread fraud. But
so far we haven't tried it.
Well,
and the point is,
but a lot of us. There are several states that only have mail-in voting, including a Republican
well,
state
this
like
is
Utah.
playing with fire. This is playing with fire. We're a very closely divided country here. And if people have to have confidence in the results of the election and the legitimacy of the government, and people trying to change the rules to this methodology, which as a matter of logic is very open to fraud and coercion, is reckless and dangerous. And the people are playing with fire.
Well, I will point out there are 5 states that only have mail-in voting, including Utah and Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, Hawaii. And they've reported over the years they've had virtually no problems. But who's trying to change the rules right now?
I would say the people who want to go to mass mail-in ballots.
But you understand why. There is a coronavirus pandemic.
Right.
And there are a lot of people, potentially, if they waited long lines when they go to the polls, and they could get sick, especially older people or people with underlying conditions. As a result, a lot of people want to change the rules so they don't have to go wait in long lines.
Well,
they don't have to touch all this.
And the appropriate way to deal with that is, number one, arrangements at the polls that protect people, which can be done. And number two, people who have pre-existing conditions and are particularly vulnerable can get an absentee ballot. I have no problem with people. I voted by absentee ballot, not by mail. I actually went to the office to cast my vote, but absentee ballots are fine.
All right, let's move on and talk a little bit about another suggestion. You've said you were worried that a foreign country could send thousands of fake ballots to people who might be impossible to detect. What are you basing that on?
I'm basing that, as I've said repeatedly, I'm basing that on logic.
Pardon?
Logic.
But have you seen any evidence that a foreign country is trying to interfere in that way?
No, I'm saying people are concerned about foreign influence, and if we use a ballot system with the system that that states are just now trying to adopt, it does leave open the possibility of counterfeiting ballots, either by someone here or someone overseas.
So you think a foreign country could do that?
I think anyone could do it.
Have you seen any evidence that they're trying to do that?
No, but most things can be counterfeited. That's why we go to the trouble of making our money the way we make it. Now, should we have Minnesota print up our money on regular parchment paper?
I asked the question because U.S. intelligence officials have said they've seen no information or intelligence that foreign countries, whether Russia or China...
Yeah, well, you asked the question, but I've answered that question several times. I said, no, I don't have any information because this is the first time we've tried such a thing.
During your tenure as Attorney General of the United States, how many indictments have you brought against people committing voter fraud?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but several I know of.
Like a handful?
I can't, I don't know.
But several doesn't sound like too many.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how many we have. I know there are a number of investigations right now, some very big ones in states.
The president also has said, and I'm quoting him directly, that he's ready to send sheriffs, law enforcement, and U.S. attorneys to polling places on Election Day. You're the Attorney General. Can the president do that legally?
It depends if he's responding to a particular criminal threat.
Well, he says he just wants to do it as a precaution.
I didn't hear him say that.
The acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, said on CNN, we don't have any authority to do that.
Right.
That's what he specifically said.
Well, I'm saying,
is he right?
Well, if there was a specific investigative danger that we detected some problem and risk.
Has he raised that possibility with you to send Justice Department, law enforcement to polling places on Election Day, November 3rd?
No.
As a precaution?
No. But sometimes they have been in the past to enforce civil rights.
Because he said we're going to send sheriffs, law enforcement, and U.S. attorneys.
We've done so in the past to enforce civil rights to make sure that people were not being harassed, and there was no suppression of vote against African Americans.
Let's talk a little bit about foreign interference, Russia specifically. The top elections official in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, our Office of National Intelligence, revealed publicly last month that Russia is working to help President Trump get elected, while both China and Iran prefer Joe Biden to win. First of all, do you accept that Russia is once again interfering in the U.S. presidential election?
I accept that there's some preliminary activity that suggests that they might try again.
Well, what does that mean?
Well, that's all I'm saying.
You think that Russia is? You've seen intelligence.
It wouldn't surprise me if Russia tries something again, of the same general genre of before. I mean, this influence basically is two kinds of things. It's hack and dump. You get into someone's mail system and then try to disclose embarrassing documents. It wouldn't surprise me if they try something like that, or any other country tries it. The other way is, social media and putting things out on social media.
Because the intelligence community says Russia, China, and Iran are seeking to interfere in the U.S. presidential election for various reasons, but mostly they want to sow dissent in our country, exacerbate racial tensions, et cetera, like that. Of those three countries that the intelligence community has pointed to, Russia, China, and Iran, which is the most assertive, the most aggressive in this area?
I believe it's China.
Which one?
China.
China more than Russia right now?
Yes.
Why do you say that?
Because I've seen the intelligence. That's what I've concluded.
What are they trying to do?
Well, I'm not going to discuss that.
But they're trying to help who win?
I'm not going to get into that.
More aggressive than Russia?
Yes.
Because the U.S. intelligence community...
Trying to influence the United States? Yes.
Yeah. I'm just trying to be precise on that area. And one of the most explosive revelations from the recently submitted Senate Intelligence Committee, which is bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats, they report on Russian interference in the 2016 election, and they say that they had confirmation that the Russians did interfere. They cite the case of Paul Manafort, who was the Trump campaign chairman, was working directly with someone the U.S. intelligence community considered to be a Russian intelligence officer. Do you accept that?
I accept that Russia made some efforts to influence the election. I wouldn't say I necessarily accept that.
But do you agree with what the Senate Intelligence Committee concluded, that Russia did directly interfere in the 2016 presidential election with the goal of helping Donald Trump?
Based on the intelligence I've seen, I don't dispute an assessment that they attempted to interfere.
I know we're almost out of time. You got a lot of stuff going on, and I'm grateful to you for joining us. This is an important interview. If the president is reelected, do you want to stay on as the Attorney General?
That would be presumptuous for me to say anything on that. I'm not going to.
But what do you think?
I'm not going to discuss that.
Are you enjoying what you're doing?
I wouldn't use the word enjoy, but it's satisfying.
It's not what you anticipated. It's not what you anticipated. You enjoyed it more the first time around when you were Attorney General?
Well, the political climate and the media was a lot different. And so...
and you had a different president, George H.W. Bush. You were the Attorney General.
Yeah, but the media should be fair and balanced, no matter who the president is. It doesn't give the media a license to lie the way a lot of the media is.
I can speak for us. We are fair and balanced.
Okay.
I'm sure you would appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you appreciate that presidents are different, and President George H.W. Bush was a very different president than President Trump.
Yes, and faced a different set of problems.
Very different set of problems, including the first Gulf War.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Attorney General.
Thank you.
Once again, good luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Good.
We'll welcome you back.
Okay, thanks.